Hi guys online. Okay, so we are going to do a Shakespeare story today, but first I have some things that I'll pass around for you to look at that my grandmother gave to me from World War II. So, well, first of all, I just have some magazines that are they're not from the time, but they are based on what was happening in history at the time. So I'll leave them out for you to look at, but I'll probably cut these up to make future lessons with. This one, take care of, because Life magazines are expensive. And this has the story of America in 100 photographs. So it kind of goes through history of the U.S. just in pictures, and then tells a little bit about some of the events that were happening. So these I'm going to put out for you up here by the windows with the others. And if you want to look through them, you can. And then the other thing I have are some pictures. So we'll pass them around. This one is of my great aunt Ruth. She was in World War II, and her job was to call the families of the people who had passed away or were missing. So can you imagine if that was your job all day?
That would be so sad.
To call people and deliver bad news. But this is a picture of her in her uniform from World War II. You can see her fancy hat and kind of what her hairstyle looked like. So we'll just pass that around. That's her in her older years at the bottom. And then this one is my grandfather. He was 17 in this picture, and he had just joined the Navy. So this one in the middle, this young handsome fellow right here, is my grandfather, my mom's dad, and his parents. So we can pass that one around. Then let's see what else we have in here. We have just some pictures from the time period. This one is a U.S. Naval Training Station. You can kind of see what the cars looked like, what the people had on. We've got my grandfather's in this one. This is his little unit. This is his crew and his officers. Notice there's an airplane in the background because his job was to ride in airplanes that did drop bombs.
How old was he when he was in it?
He joined when he was 17. But I don't know what year. This is a submarine, the submarine tender. And we've got, is that stuck together? No.
The submarine tender.
The USS Monaghan, and it's circled and it says, "That's me." So you can't see anybody, but that would be my grandfather up there. So you guys can pass those around. And then we have this book. I'll see how long it is. I didn't realize we had a book. This is the plane that my grandfather was in World War II. It was called a PBY Catalina, aircraft 62. So it's kind of a smaller plane, and it shows pictures and has information about how it's built and some of the things. It was called an airboat. It doesn't really have like a story behind it. It just has information and shows different versions. And then it tells some of the operations that the PBY Catalinas participated in during World War II. So the U.S. Navy PBY Patrol Squadron operations during the waning years of peacetime consisted mostly entirely of training exercises for flight and ground crews. Right before World War II. So this is like in between World War I and World War II. They're mostly just doing training exercises. World War II, it says, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and the loss of personnel and aircraft in the Hawaiian area was a disaster to the patrol squadrons based there. 27 of Pat Wing 1's aircraft were destroyed and 6 were damaged. Only the 3 PBYs on patrol during the attack were operational. At Ford Island, the entire VP-22 was out of action when a bomb hit and destroyed their ramp. This was not the case in the Philippines area, where tensions had mounted steadily during the weeks prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, as Japanese and U.S. patrol planes avoided contact when they met in the offshore search areas. Patwing 10's response to this hostility emphasized deployment to scattered outlying bases from which operations could continue if the attack came. Unfortunately, the overwhelming strength of the enemy attack and the complete loss of air control had not been anticipated, and many of Patwing 10's PBYs were lost in their moorings during the first few days of combat. On December 11th, 7 planes returning from patrol were destroyed by strafing fighters as they were mooring. Early engagements between the PBY-4s and the enemy aircraft dramatically emphasized the PBY's vulnerability. Lack of crew armor and self-sealing fuel tanks virtually assured the success of a determined attack by enemy aircraft. In the few recorded accounts of attacks against formations of PBYs, there's little evidence of any attempt that the P-boats to maintain group integrity and use mutually supporting firepower to ward off the enemy. This isn't making a lot of sense to me. I'm just going to pass it around and let you look at it. So this is the type of plane that my grandfather's crew served in during World War II. Okay, so while you guys are passing those things around and checking them out, you can just stick them on my desk when they get to Ian back there. We are going to read another play by MacBeth. This play... another play by William Shakespeare. It is called Macbeth. Hopefully it's in here. I didn't even look ahead of time. Yep, it is. So you guys are going to tell me at the end if it is a history, a comedy, or a tragedy.
Tragedy.
Romeo and Juliet was a comedy, right?
Yeah, it was a comedy.
No, Romeo and Juliet was a very tragic love story.
Yes,
And we have a little picture here. It is of witches casting a spell.
Ooh. I barely know this thing.
Okay, so here's our synopsis. This kind of tells us what the story is about. It's a little summary. First, it starts with a line from the original Shakespeare play. I am in blood, steeped in so far that should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as go o'er. After 3 witches tell Macbeth he will one day be king of Scotland, he can't help wondering if their words will come true. It seems impossible, but for Macbeth's evil wife, Lady Macbeth, nothing is impossible. She spurs him on into a web of murder, mystery, and horror from which neither of them can escape. Tell me this, what is the setting of Macbeth? Where does this story take place?
3 witches.
No, where does the story take place?
No clue.
What country?
You get, you're not getting.
Well, kind of. Listen. Listen again. Listen again. After 3 witches tell Macbeth he will one day be king of Scotland.
Scotlandio.
Okay.
Are you ready?
What news of the battle? Cried Prince Malcolm as another injured, bleeding soldier was brought into King Duncan's camp. Good news, panted the wounded man as the old king emerged from his tent. Macbeth showed those Norwegians and that traitor MacDonald. I saw Macbeth slice him open with a sword from the belly to the back teeth. Norway fought back, but we held firm, and the battle went our way. The King of Norway is asking for a truce. The man's voice trailed off, and his eyes began to close. Get him to a doctor, King Duncan ordered. Then he turned to Lord Ross. I want Macbeth rewarded for this victory, he said. Find him and tell him that I'm making him Thane of Cawdor in recognition of his loyal service. What country are they fighting?
Norway.
Norway! Meanwhile, Macbeth and his friend Banquo were making their way across the mist-covered moor that lay between the battlefield and the camp. "What a horrific day," said Macbeth, "and yet a day of happiness too." "Yes, thank heaven the war is over," Banquo agreed. Then he paused, staring ahead. "What?" Macbeth peered into the mist, gripping the hilt of his sword. He thought he could see the shape of 3 figures sitting patiently on the ground, almost as if they were waiting for him. "Who are you?" demanded Banquo. "Say something," he shouted. "Hail Macbeth," replied a woman's voice, "Thane of Glamis." "That's me," said Macbeth. "What do you want with me?" "Hail Macbeth," said a second voice, "Thane of Cawdor." "Hail Macbeth," came an older voice, as through the mist the shapes of 3 women dressed in black cloaks became clear. "Hail Macbeth, that shall be king hereafter." "What do you mean?" asked asked Macbeth nervously, for he was afraid the women were witches. "Well, it sounds like good news," Banquo joked. "Hail Banquo," replied the oldest witch, "not a king, but a father of kings to come." "That's mysterious," laughed Banquo, "but it's good enough for me. Come on, Macbeth, let's go. Duncan's expecting us." "Wait," said Macbeth, frozen to the spot. "Where did you get this news? I am Thane of Glamis, but not Cawdor. And how could I be king?" But just then a passing drift of fog obscured the witches, and when it cleared, they were gone.
Because they are witches.
"Macbeth, my liege," came a cheery voice. Lord Ross was marching up to them out of the mist. "Or should I say Thane of Cawdor?" He grinned at them. "What?" gasped Macbeth. Banquo's mouth dropped open too. "Your new title," Ross said. "The king's heard all about your fearless fighting. This is your reward. Cawdor Castle is yours. Now the king wants to see you. Let's go." "What can this mean?" Macbeth whispered to Banquo as they tramped along. "What they say came true. Banquo, this could mean you'll be a father of kings." "And you could be king yourself," agreed Banquo. "But Macbeth, be careful. Don't be deceived by the words of witches. Duncan is the king, remember?" But Macbeth couldn't banish the thought from his mind. He was Duncan's cousin and third in line to the throne. Would he really become king? As soon as he got a chance, Macbeth wrote a letter to his wife. He was sure she would know what to do. And here's the letter. "My dearest wife, you will have heard by now of our great victory. Duncan is so delighted with my success he has named me Thane of Cawdor. So you, my dear, are now the lady of 2 great castles. But perhaps there is even more to come. You must keep this secret. When we were returning from the battle, Banquo and I met 3 strange women on the moor. Witches, there is no doubt. They hailed me Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor, and then king. Just moments later, Lord Ross arrived to tell me I had been made Thane of Cawdor. Imagine, my darling, if the rest of their prophecy comes true, you will one day be the Queen of Scotland. I am to meet the king at his palace today, and I will be home tomorrow. Your loving husband, Macbeth." This is weird. What if you were out on the playground one day and something like that happened to you?
The witches were like,
I would be like,
I'd be like,
call police.
Camden?
I'd say,
first thing I'd say, I go, I declare war on China.
I'd actually say I just
China.
Now remember, this was 500 years ago.
Oh gosh.
Or China or rabbits.
The next day, the letter arrived at Macbeth's castle. Lady Macbeth smiled a satisfied, cat-like smile as she finished reading it, rolled it up, and held it to her heart. What do you think they mean by a cat-like smile? Maybe a little bit mischievous?
How about this?
"So," she purred to herself, "Queen of Scotland. But the question is, does that cowardly husband of mine have the courage to make our dreams come true? She tossed the letter aside onto an embroidered cushion, strolled over to the stone windowsill, and looked out over the shimmering sea. There was a loud knock at the door, and a maid burst in. "My lady," she panted, "we've just heard the king is coming here tonight to pay us a royal visit." Blake, you need to stop rolling around in the chair, or I'm going to take it. You're being very distracting to me trying to read. Like, Ertley, you may sit in the chair. What excellent news, said Lady Macbeth. Tell the kitchens to prepare a banquet and make the best chambers in the tower ready for our guests. The maid hurried off. Excellent news indeed, Lady Macbeth said to herself, her green eyes flashing. I'm sure we'll make the king's last night very comfortable.
Hey, are you gonna kill him?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a comedy.
My darling! Macbeth had arrived. Welcome home, my dear, cried his wife, encircling him with her arms. Blake, keep your chair still, please. My gallant Thane of Glamis, my courageous Thane of Cawdor, and perhaps my future royal husband. Ah, yes, but the king, said Macbeth. He's coming to stay with his sons and all his advisors. We have to get the castle ready. The preparations are all taken care of, my dear. Now all that remains is for us to take care of him. I don't know what you're talking about, said Macbeth, looking away uncomfortably. I think you do, cajoled Lady Macbeth. I can see it in your face. We won't get a chance like this again. It has to be tonight. No, Macbeth hesitated. Let's talk about it another time. His wife smiled at him indulgently. You just leave all the details to me, she said, and swept out of the room. What is she planning to do?
Kill the king.
What a lovely spot, sighed Duncan as the royal party reached the gates of Macbeth's castle. Dusk was falling, the house martins twittered and swooped around the castle's stone towers and ledges. Your noble majesty, exclaimed Lady Macbeth, gliding across the drawbridge in her blood-red velvet gown. How delighted we are to have you as our guest. I do hope you'll be comfortable here since we've had so little time to prepare for your visit. My dear lady, I'm sure we'll have a wonderful time, replied the white-haired king. I just hope you haven't gone to too much trouble. Now let's go inside and see your husband. And taking her hand, Duncan stepped across the drawbridge under the castle's battlements and into the dark shadows. The castle cooks had prepared a dazzling 5-course feast, fit for any emperor, and King Duncan seemed to be enjoying every mouthful. But as the wine flowed and the guests gossiped, Macbeth excused himself. He had to think. Sinking onto a stone seat in a remote corner of the castle, he held his head in his hands and sighed. Oh, I can't do it, he groaned. I can't kill him. Duncan is a good king and a good man. I should be protecting him from danger, not carrying the knife myself. Here is evil Lady Macbeth in her blood-red gown.
That's kind of creepy. If the blood gets on her, nobody will notice.
What are you doing here? Whispered a cross voice. His wife was standing beside him. Don't you know the feast is nearly over? The king's asking where you are. Listen, said Macbeth, looking her in the eye at last. This can't go any further. Duncan has blessed us with this visit. We can't kill him now. Can't? Lady Macbeth hissed. Only a coward says can't. I'm not a coward, said Macbeth. I risked my life fighting for my king and country. But murder? Murder's not brave. It's evil. For goodness sake, his wife snapped. Do you want to be king or don't you? But what if it goes wrong? Said Macbeth weakly. It won't go wrong, not if you don't mess it up. Listen, I'll drug his bodyguards. You'll use their daggers to kill him and put the daggers back in their hands. And everyone will think they've done it, said Macbeth, especially when we make up a huge fuss about how upset we are, his wife said. All right, said Macbeth. I'll do it. Good, said his wife. Now get back in the dining room.
I I'd break up with her.
Is it really gonna do it?
I don't know. That night was the darkest Macbeth had ever known. The moon had already sunk below the horizon when he set out across the courtyard, heading for the tower where Duncan lay sleeping peacefully. He still couldn't believe what he was about to do. He stopped and rubbed his eyes. When he opened them again, the darkness seemed to be swirling in front of him. Something shiny glinted at him out of the gloom. It became clearer, floating in the air near his hand. It was a dagger. Macbeth felt himself breaking out in a sweat. It looked so real. He reached out and tried to grasp the handle, but his fingers passed right through it. As he drew back his hand in horror, he saw as clear as day drops of bright red blood forming on the dagger's gleaming blade. "No," Macbeth choked, barely able to speak. "You're not real. I'm imagining things. Go away!" He screamed at the dagger, but it still floated there, taunting him. Then, through the dark air, he heard a small bell ringing. Ding, ding. It was Lady Macbeth's signal that the coast was clear. Macbeth swallowed hard and walked firmly in the direction of the tower. "Come on, Macbeth, where are you?" Lady Macbeth mumbled to herself as she paced impatiently up and down the castle corridor. She couldn't imagine what could be taking him so long. She had already given Duncan's bodyguards a drugged bedtime drink and left their daggers ready at the foot of the king's bed. Macbeth's task was an easy one. Just then, her husband's voice echoed from the end of the passageway. I've done it," he said faintly. "But look at my hands." His eyes were wide with horror. "What about them?" said his wife impatiently. She looked down at his blood-soaked fingers. "Macbeth," she gasped, "why on earth did you bring the daggers with you? You should have put them in the guards' hands. Go back at once and make it look as if they did it." "I can't go back. I'm too afraid to look at what I've done." "Oh, give them to me," fumed Lady Macbeth. She grabbed the daggers, which were slippery with blood, and stormed off back to the tower. "The king is dead!" Lord Macduff's voice echoed around the castle. "Treason! Murder most foul!" His cries brought the other guests, Lord Ross and Lord Lennox, Banquo and his son Fleance, and the princes Malcolm and Donalbain, stumbling from their beds. "What's going on?" called Macbeth, emerging from his bedchamber. His hands had been washed clean, and he had put on his nightshirt, although he had not slept a wink. "See for yourself!" Macduff shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the tower. "I went to wake the king and found him dead. He's been stabbed in his sleep." "No!" Macbeth hurried up the stone steps to Duncan's room as his wife wandered out into the hall. "What's all this noise?" she asked innocently. "Terrible news, my lady, terrible news," said Macduff. "Our royal king is murdered in his bed." "What? In our house?" said Lady Macbeth in a trembling voice, blinking in fake confusion. "It's true!" wailed Macbeth from the top of the tower steps. "King Duncan has been stabbed!" But who did it?" stammered Prince Donalbain tearfully. "His bodyguards, by the look of it," said Macduff. "And then they went and paid for their crime." "And they have paid for their crimes," Macbeth announced suddenly. "When I saw them lying there, stained with guilt, I killed them." Everyone stared at him. "My anger and grief overcame me," he cried. "When I saw my king lying dead, I had to avenge them." "Oh, help me!" squealed his wife, toppling over in a faint to distract attention from Macbeth. "Look to the lady," said Banquo, and several lords rushed to her side. "And send news to the palace. We must arrange the funeral and discuss what to do." Lady Macbeth was carried back to her bed to recover, and servants were called to attend to their bodies. Prince Malcolm took his younger brother by the arm, led him to a quiet corner, and spoke to him in hushed tones. "Donalbain, we've got to get out of here." Why, the murderers are dead. Murdoch and McAllister? Said Malcolm. You don't really think it was them, do you? I don't. They were like brothers to him. They would never have done such a thing. You mean it was someone else? Who? I'm not sure, but whoever it is, I don't think they've finished. We must leave. It isn't safe for us here. You stay with our cousins in Ireland, and I'll go to London until the truth has come out. Why isn't it safe for the princes?
Because they could get murdered in their sleep.
Right, because remember, Macbeth is third in line for the crown, so that means Donalbain and Malcolm are ahead of him in line.
This tape right there.
I know, it's okay. I already told Mr. Andy. The floor.
Yeah, the floor broke. Do you know what that did?
But then people will think we did it, said Donalbain. We have no choice. If we don't get out of the way, we'll be next. And so the brothers quietly slipped away to the stables, saddled their horses, and galloped off into the dawn. It's a shady business and no mistake, mused Lord Ross as he and Macduff sat outside the castle. What's the latest news? Well, the finger of guilt points to the princes, said Macduff. They've run away. People are saying they must have killed Duncan, planning to take over the throne, then lost their nerve and escaped. Though I must say, I never dreamed they would harm their beloved father. They were devoted to him. A terrible shame, said Ross. So I suppose Macbeth is next in line. It's all settled, said Macduff. He's being crowned tomorrow. Well, I'd better attend the ceremony, said Ross. Will you be coming? No, frowned Macduff. It's home to Fife for me. And to be honest, I think there might be more to this than meets the eye. I just hope Macbeth will be a good king as Duncan was. We're going to read one more paragraph and then we're going to save the rest for tomorrow because it's long.
I won't be here tomorrow.
I will be here tomorrow.
Wait, are you going to be here Wednesday? Are you going to be here
Thursday?
past 12? When we all get home? Dang it. Maybe.
Well, we'll talk about it later. A few days later, Banquo found himself waiting in a large hall in the royal palace. King Macbeth had asked to see him. Well, you've got it all now, Macbeth, he said to himself as he wandered around the lavishly furnished room. Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor, and now the crown. He heard footsteps approaching. But I'm afraid you didn't come by it very honestly, he mumbled before the doors had swung open. Banquo, my good friend, cried Macbeth. He was wearing his crown and fur robes. You wanted to see me, your majesty? Yes, said Macbeth. You see, we're having a special banquet this evening, and I insist that you come. Why, of course, said Banquo with a false smile. I could never refuse such a kind invitation. I'm going riding with Flance this afternoon, but I'll be back at the palace in time for dinner. They both smiled politely, and Banquo took his leave. He knows, growled Macbeth, as soon as his old friend had left. He knows. A servant appeared at the door. The men you sent for, sir, he said. They're here. Dun, dun, dun. So, Macbeth he did excellent in the battle with Norway. He helped win the war. The king honors him by giving him a new title and a second castle. And he sees the three witches, and they predict that he will also be king. So, if he's the third in line, what plan does Lady Macbeth come up with?
Killing the other two.
Killing the king, and I'm sure she would have killed the princes should they have stayed, but they decided to run off. So now everyone's assuming the princes were in on it, and they crowned Macbeth king. Who knows what Macbeth has done?
Killed the king.
His friend Banquo.
Banquo.
Dun, dun.